Deep beneath solid granite, terrified men waited for the end of the world.
The Cold War drove humanity underground. Superpowers spent billions on secret concrete tombs. Today, we uncover the 10 most classified, heavily fortified underground bases of the Cold War.
Number 10. A phantom labyrinth built for the ruthless elite.
In 1950s Moscow, Stalin ordered a secret subterranean city built completely off the grid to survive atomic fire. It connected the Kremlin directly to hidden command bunkers, the ultimate escape route for the powerful.
The guards worked in absolute silence. The suffocating darkness crushed their minds over long, lonely shifts.
If nuclear fire rained down, this steel beast would carry the ruthless leadership to safety.
The Russian elites had their escape route. But what about the Americans?
Number 9. Congress built a secret tomb beneath absolute luxury.
During the 1960s Cold War in West Virginia, unaware civilians danced above a massive, hidden political survival bunker.
But strictly hidden behind the floral wallpaper lay a colossal 25-ton nuclear blast door.
This massive bunker was built solely to save Congress. The general public was completely abandoned.
For 30 long years, this facility remained fully stocked, silently waiting for global annihilation. The isolated guards lived in constant paranoia.
They knew that if the sirens ever wailed, their own families on the surface would burn.
The Greenbrier was exposed in 1992, but the government simply vanished into an even deeper hole.
Number 8. A shadow fortress. Wait until number 1.
Deep inside the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia during 1959, an entire shadow government stood ready to seize power. Emergency alarms screamed. The president's Doomsday helicopter was approaching. The nightmare was becoming real.
Unelected officials sat in silence. If Washington burned, they became the new rulers of the ashes.
A private army guarded this shadow government. Their orders were to shoot anyone without absolute clearance.
Thousands of beds lay empty. Only the most vital political elites would be spared.
Operators listened to static, practicing the terrifying day they would broadcast to a dead nation.
Mount Weather proved one dark truth. The government's survival was always more important than yours. They waited for a doomsday that never came. But other nations hid their secrets in the ice.
Number 7. A nuclear nightmare hidden inside a freezing glacier.
Soldiers shivered violently. They carved a massive, secret nuclear missile base directly into the Greenland ice.
The objective was absolute stealth, but the intense heat of the nuclear reactor began melting their tomb.
The massive glacier shifted, crushing the base. And worth, a silent death.
Panic erupted. The terrified soldiers immediately abandoned the collapsing base, running for their lives.
Mother Nature completely defeated the military. But they left the deadly nuclear core buried behind.
The government buried their radioactive failure in the snow, hoping the world would simply forget. But while America froze, the British were digging an entire city directly under their countryside.
Number 6. A colossal subterranean ghost town built to house the entire British government. Deep beneath quaint villages, they built a secret metropolis with its own lakes and hospitals.
Prime ministers were expected to rule a radioactive wasteland from this exact, suffocating room. Subscribe to War Cinema 4K, because the secrets they buried down here defy all human logic. Guards patrolled these empty streets for decades, slowly losing their minds to the eternal silence. But Burlington had a fatal flaw. The Soviets knew its exact location before it was even finished.
The illusion of safety shattered. Burlington became a multi-billion-dollar tomb, completely useless before it even opened.
They locked the heavy doors and walked away. The ghosts of paranoia were left to rot.
Number 5. A Doomsday submarine fleet. Just wait for number 1.
The Soviets carved a massive submarine base directly into the solid rock of Balaclava. These steel leviathans carried enough nuclear firepower to turn entire American coasts into ash.
The base was so secret, the entire town above it was completely erased from all maps.
Relatives lived just miles away, never knowing their husbands were loading apocalyptic weapons right below them. The psychological weight was crushing. They lived in total darkness, fully prepared to end the world. But one night, the impenetrable harbor defenses were breached. Something lethal had slipped inside. It wasn't an enemy attack. It was the freezing ocean violently breaking through the pressurized containment gates. Number 4. A massive backup pentagon carved into solid mountain. Massive steel springs suspended entire buildings inside the cavern. It was a floating city built for Armageddon.
During the Cuban Missile Crisis, terrified officers sprinted through these frozen tunnels, sweating in the chill.
Trembling fingers hovered over consoles. The blast doors locked them inside, permanently abandoning their families above.
The recycled air tasted like copper and sheer panic. They were buried alive in a technological coffin.
Raven Rock proved a dark truth. In a nuclear war, only generals buried under solid granite would survive.
Number 3. A massive underground airport hiding lethal fighter jets. Deafening jet engines screamed inside the suffocating stone tunnels. The air was a toxic mix of fuel and adrenaline. But when the nation collapsed, the army couldn't let this fortress fall. They prepared a devastating, fiery surprise. 56 tons of explosives detonated simultaneously. The absolute pride of their air force was instantly vaporized. Decades of back-breaking labor and billions of dollars, completely erased in a single heartbeat of panic. The generals realized the dark truth. The greatest threat wasn't foreign bombs, but their own collapsing empire. Today, it sits radioactive and haunted, a massive, toxic tombstone dedicated to Cold War paranoia.
While militaries destroyed their fortresses, millions of ordinary citizens were forced to dig their own graves.
Number 2. A shadow city dug by hand. Prepare for number 1.
Beneath Beijing, China in 1969, 300,000 terrified citizens dug a massive subterranean shadow city using primitive tools.
They built schools and clinics in the suffocating darkness, preparing to live underground forever.
The government promised perfect safety, but these claustrophobic mud walls would have become an inescapable mass grave.
Millions of miles of these unmapped tunnels remain completely sealed, and no one knows what still breathes down there. Decades later, modern cities stand above, but the forgotten diggers left behind a terrifying maze of ghosts.
Millions prepared to die in the dirt. It was the ultimate psychological torture of the Cold War.
While civilians dug in the mud, the world's greatest superpower was carving the ultimate Doomsday fortress.
Operating since 1966 in Colorado. NORAD.
Number 1. The absolute pinnacle of Cold War paranoia, buried under 2,000 feet of solid granite.
NORAD built an impenetrable underground city. It was designed to withstand a direct thermonuclear strike.
Inside, the air was thick with tension.
Every single radar blip could mean the apocalypse. Heavily armed guards patrolled the steel corridors. No one was allowed in, and no one could leave. Entire buildings sat on giant steel springs, ready to violently absorb the shockwaves of a nuclear blast.
They held the fate of humanity in trembling hands. The psychological weight was absolutely crushing.
But in 1979, the nightmare came true. The master computer suddenly warned of an all-out Soviet strike.
For 6 agonizing minutes, terrified men stared at the screens, fully believing the world was ending.
It was a training tape accidentally loaded into the mainframe. A simple glitch almost triggered Armageddon.
When the sun rose, the doors opened. But the deep psychological scars of that night remained forever. Today, many of these underground fortresses sit completely abandoned, slowly rotting in absolute silence. They are haunting monuments to a time when fear forced mankind to dig their own massive graves. But the true horror isn't the millions of tons of concrete. It is what they represent.
Because somewhere right now, brand new bunkers are being quietly dug for the exact same reasons.
We build impenetrable fortresses beneath the earth, desperately trying to hide from our own destructive nature.
Don't get left behind when the next siren wails. Subscribe to War Cinema 4K now.